Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Music Masterclass. And no, I don't have groovy new theme music for this yet. I will. I'll write that next. It's going to be a totally different thing, I think. I wanted the cafe to just be a fun groove, and this one, I think I'll put a little more structural thought to it. But I do want to talk about the music that I created for the MuseScore Cafe. So, those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let me back up a little bit. Hi, I'm Marc Sabatella. I'm the director of the Mastering MuseScore School. And this is the Music Masterclass where I talk about making music. And I also do, and this is every Thursday, I also do the MuseScore Cafe on Wednesdays. And in the cafe, I talk about using MuseScore. And oh, by the way, we create music. Here we talk about making music. And oh, by the way, I use MuseScore to do it. Um, I did write some theme music that I kind of debuted in the cafe yesterday. And it's a short piece of music, and I do want to, that's going to be what's been on my mind musically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of creating that. And that'll be what I'll do as a demonstration. And then I'm going to look at some of the music that some of you all have submitted. So thanks to everyone checking in here from various different places. Yeah, it'll definitely be more of a classical sort of vibe of what I'm going to create, I think, for the Music Masterclass. So, but let me play you for just to get started here, the music as it is. Let me check my volume. Yeah, well, I'm not going to talk over it so that the volume level's fine. I'm going to play you the music uh, for the cafe and then talk a little bit about the process of creating it. So here goes. Right. This is the part that I talk over more. If I will talk, I'm going to speak up a little bit because I know it's on the loud side. I would turn it down. So, this talk, right? There's nothing interesting happening here except me talking. Okay, and the reason I talked over that part was to emphasize that there is a purpose to that. And there's really a purpose to a lot of the things going on in this music. So the idea of writing music for a specific purpose, that was, I think like a year ago, I did a cafe about writing for a purpose. And I think it was right at the beginning of like coronavirus-y kind of stuff. Uh, I kind of think. But so my purpose was I wanted background music. I wanted a theme song for the cafe. But what I realize is this. If you think about like a television show, okay, so I'll show my age here. I think about theme songs, memorable theme songs. I'm thinking Gilligan's Island. I'm thinking Brady Bunch. It's a show where the whole premise of the television show can be summed up by listening to the theme song and the lyrics to it. And the lyrics, so there's melody, there's lyrics, and that tells you this whole story. Of course, not all TV show theme songs are that way, but a lot of them are, right? Sometimes there's just instrumental theme music, and credits are scrolling, right? They're showing who, starring Michael Landon as blah, 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 or whatever. And all that information is happening in a purely textual way. Well, that's not what I was going to go for here. I didn't want a standalone theme song. I wanted something I could talk over. So I needed it to not be, I want it to be something that would stay in the background while I could talk over it and yet be interesting. So what I did is I created sections, like large parts of the piece are just this bam, then one little hit there, right? So during that little thing here, this isn't really very melodic. It's not meant to be. It's interesting. It's slightly melodic. Bum 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 ba dum bum bum. That's actually the first thing that I wrote. I just sat down at the piano and started playing with these chords, and I started asking myself what I wanted as what I wanted it to feel like. And I was actually I missed the I missed the mark a little bit. I think I cranked the energy level up a few notches from where I was aiming. To be honest, I was aiming more for Frasier. Again, it's a show I never even watched, but I'm vaguely familiar with what the theme music sounded like. I was looking for sort of a more laid back. I mean, this is laid back in a way, but I was looking for more laid back than this. But it's not what came out. And so I had to scale back some of the ideas so that I can keep the energy of this groove without taking over everything else. So that is was kind of my starting place here. I will mention also one other starting place because before I wrote that groove, uh, I actually thought about this. That lick there. So this is Maynard Ferguson, Give It One. I heard that in my head and thought about starting with something that felt like that. Some sort of trumpet cascading kind of like pyramid figure. That was actually not even a pyramid. It was kind of unison, right? Until the very end of that figure. At that point, it's octaves is about it. And then the band comes in. I was imagining something that was like sort of had that sort of vibe, but a pyramid to it. Um, as an introduction. And you'll see, well, what I actually came up with isn't that, but is true to that initial starting point. That is my version of that Maynard Ferguson thing. I really made a lot of changes. I didn't even go back and listen to the Maynard Ferguson thing. I just had this memory of that uh, line that serves as a pickup kind of to the start of the piece, and so that was one of my starting points. But I didn't even try to work out the notes or anything. That was just an idea in my head. The first notes that came out were this piano groove here. So I'm telling you all this background because it's interest it's useful. It's a part of the compositional process to have this picture in mind. You don't want to just start throwing notes down and then seeing what happens. I mean, you can do that too. That's fine too, but I'm talking about something that has a lot more purpose to that. And certainly, when we start looking at some of the fugues that some of you have submitted, we'll definitely, purpose is all about what's going on with the fugue. So, um, I basically came up with that groove. My original version of the groove had that ba-dum bum bum both times. Instead of bum bum bum, it was ba-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum bum and I originally had that, and then I decided to simplify it and have the first statement of it be a little simpler, just dum bum 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 ba-dum bum bum, so it'd have a little variety between the first measure and the second measure. And then the pattern here is it's I'm calling it just B flat 7, but you can see what's really happening here. A flat, A, B flat, right? It's B flat, B flat, B flat, A flat, A, B flat. I didn't bother putting chord symbols on there because if someone were to try to improvise over this or try to create a melody over this, you probably wouldn't worry about these little passing chords. You'd probably just let that just be interesting stuff that happens in the rhythm section. And that in itself is also something to keep in mind, that you don't have to micromanage everything. This is a lesson about that what jazz in general brings to the table, and not just jazz, but jazz then giving way to rock and funk and all these other styles that weren't initially uh through composed, right? It wasn't, most of this music isn't like this is all written out, but traditionally most of this wouldn't be all written out, and what you would happen is you would let things happen. You you let the pianist plays their part, the guitar player plays their part, the bass player plays their part, and somehow it all works together without micromanaging exactly which note lines up with which note. you can micromanage that, but you run the danger of losing something. So I want to call attention to a couple things that happened here. I wrote that A flat, A, B flat, and then I wanted the answering phrase to come down. D flat, D flat, B, B flat. So I have one version where it goes down and comes up, the other version where it goes up and comes down. My bass line doesn't really reflect that. Ba-do-do-dum, dwee-dee-dwee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Nothing about this actually fits this chord. They don't go together. This is not a bass line that I would have come up with if I was micromanaging how it's fitting this chord progression. But it's a bass line that felt good to me. I'm not a bassist. We got a fantastic fretless bass player here. On the chat here, and this is just a bass line that I felt like somehow honored the groove, even though these notes don't really fit. This ends up being an F pulled up to a G natural that doesn't really fit that A flat 7 chord, right? Here we're on an A7 chord, and I got this C being pulled up to a D. Neither that doesn't fit that A7 chord, but it doesn't have to. That sort of thing where if each individual line has its own integrity, like let me solo that line so you can hear just the piano part and then just the bass part. Here is just the piano part. Right? So that's, I didn't actually mean to dock that thing. Let me undock it again. Okay, and now my palette is way too wide. Dang it, I hate it when that happens. All right, but now I'm going to solo, so that's the piano part, but now I'm going to solo just the bass part. And the bass part makes perfect sense on its own, too. Right? So, and yeah, that's absolutely right. The comment in the chat there, Michael. It's there is tension that is created because these notes, this right, these notes don't really fit what's going on in the piano part. It creates tension that we then arrive at the resolution together. Well, if you think about it, that is counterpoint. This is what counterpoint is all about. Independent lines where there's tension and release that happens. There's dissonances that happen that then resolve. Now, I'm not micromanaging it in the level of thinking about like writing a Baroque fugue where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got a seventh between these two voices. I'd better move this one by step and keep this one as a common tone. Or I have a tritone between the two voices. I'd better move them both by step in contrary motion. I'm not thinking like that exactly, but the overall effect is the same. There's some temporary tension that happens and it resolves when I reach the next down point, the next the next downbeat. And yeah, so this where it says full is basically a whole step. So this is tablature notation. This isn't something you normally do in standard notation. You don't use this bend. I would have notated it as a G with a scoop leading up into it. It just so happens I can get playback to happen more easily if I steal the tablature notation and adapt it in here. So I notate the F and then notate it with this this thing that comes off the I think it comes off, no, not the arpeggios, it comes off the articulations palette over here. So that goes up to a G and this C goes up to a D. So I really would have notated that normally as a G with like a grace note leading into it. And then I could have put in a little invisible glyphs mark to get the little weird, to get that pull sound happening, but whatever. So if I now go back to my mixer and solo the two parts together, sorry. they work together. And again, rhythmically, this note here, this bent note happens while the piano is tying over a note, and then the piano comes in with this note, and then the bass comes in with that note, and I didn't make them lock together. I actually thought about it, and then I tried it and didn't like it. I was like, no, that's like the bass trying to do what the piano is doing, and that wasn't working for me. I wanted the bass to feel like it made sense on its own, and this is what made sense on its own. Now, the guitar part, I added later. Oops, I have to unmute it. So if I put in the guitar part, like this click here happens with that there. So this lines up, and this lines up. And notice that I had to change it, right? This is on the and, so there's an eighth rest on the beat, and then the 16th. Here, it's only a 16th rest, and then that. So I did decide to make that line up. When I did it the other way and actually put this on the and, I didn't like it. It sounded cluttered. So this is the sort of thing that I would say in a real band situation, the guitar player wouldn't be turning to the pianist necessarily to say, hey, what beat are you playing that last thing on so I can line up? He'd be listening and then making it line up if they chose it. They might start off by going, chi-chi, ching, chi-chi, ching, chi-chi, and then say, that last note didn't feel right. Let me move it. And then they would listen to the pianist and then get it to line up well. So my process in writing this is very much like the process that I think members of a band would go through in deciding how to make this groove work. In a jazz setting, you're making this stuff up as you go along, so there's no chance for this. But if you're doing this in more of a rock or a funk kind of setting, or a jazz group where you really are working out arrangements, then yeah, you would get to work on this groove and then make these little adjustments and decide how you're going to have your basic groove be. But anyhow, so I say I didn't micromanage things. I did micromanage them by not micromanaging them. You know what I mean? By not trying to make them line up, by saying, no, I'm going to make sure that these work contrapuntally, make sure they work as independent parts. And so really, the first two bars is the composition. This is all there is. Once you hear that, everything else just sort of falls from it. This little down, that's just a little figure I just tossed off. Again, I had that Maynard Ferguson thing in the back of my head. And then this little splat here, I was like, well, now that I brought the horns in, I want them to do something. But again, I decided to not have them write a melody. I decided to not write a melody. I didn't want to write something that would be more interesting than the accompaniment, basically, because I want to talk over the accompaniment. That's the thing is, so when I use this as a theme song, I'm going to go and I'm going to do something like this. Hi, my name is Marc Sabatella, director of the Mastering MuseScore School, and this is MuseScore Cafe. Right? So I can time my speaking to this. I didn't write the script and then give myself breaks. I just knew I was going to want to do something like that. So this chord progression, if people aren't aware, is a blues chord progression. So all I did is write this riff. And once I've written that, I've essentially written the piece, because it's a blues chord progression. So it's 4 bars of the one chord. It's a fairly simple blues chord progression, except for the turnaround. So for people who aren't familiar with blues, it's 4 bars of the one chord, 4 bars of that B flat 7 chord, and then it goes to the 4 chord. And I'm just going to the 4 chord. And yes, I'm doing that same sort of thing here. I do that same thing of E flat, E flat, E flat, and then D flat, D, E flat, E flat, E flat, and then instead of going ba because I don't want to come back to the E flat. In a blues, it's 2 bars of the E flat, and then it's back to the 1. So that's the typical stereotypical blues chord progression. So the original D flat, B, B flat brings me back where I was. So this is exactly like that's exactly the first bar transposed up a fourth. This starts off like that, and then it's the second half of the original version in that original key. So this also ties into what I was talking about. Whoa, what the heck? Huh. Flickering fluorescent light, sorry. Ties in what I was talking about with writing a fugue, that the second entrance is going to come in the key of the 5, but not really changing key, and then it needs to come back to the 1. Well, this is kind of the same thing with the 4 chord, and this is the sort of tonal adjustment you make to bring you back to the key you want to be in. And so the final so in typical blues, it's 4 phrases. The first phrase is all about the 1 chord. The second phrase is about the 4 chord coming back to 1. The last phrase is about the 5 chord coming back to 1. And that's it. So 4 bars of 1. The next phrase is 4 to 1. The last phrase is 5 to 1. It's seldom that simple. And especially the last phrase is usually not just 2 bars of 5, 2 bars of 1. There's all sorts of different variations. And that's where I actually threw in the most variations here. So this is just literally 2 bars of 4 coming back to 1. And then I have this 6 chord here. Why 6? Because instead of 2 bars of 5, I wanted a 2-5. That's a typical jazz thing. A typical blues band version of that last phrase is 5 chord, 4 chord, 1 chord. A typical jazz version of that last phrase is 2 chord, 5 chord, 1 chord. Either way, it's basically about 5 coming to 1. So I wanted to do that 2, 5, 1, but I wanted to kind of honor this thing that I had created of these, these moving that voicing in parallel and doing these different things there. So I played with different versions of that at the piano until I found a version that I was happy with. And it went, it went like this. So let me solo the piano part for a second, because again, I think there's interesting things to see about it. Here's just the piano part. So I wanted to keep the voicings all kind of centered in the same area. And then when it came back to B flat, I wanted it to come back to the same B flat voicing I had been at. But I also knew this wasn't very interesting melodically. Let me get my D sharp. Da, 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 da. It's okay. It's smooth voice leading, but that's like an alto part, right? That didn't feel like the melody to me. But that's what I did at the piano, and it did what I wanted it to do. It kept me from moving too far up the piano. It kept my voicings where I wanted them to be, so that I got to end up in the same range. All these voicings are in the same range here. Yes, the E7 the left hand had a jump down. That's kind of unavoidable a little bit. But the right hand voicings all kind of stayed basically on the staff. So let me just do that again. So that's what I have, but I kind of knew that wasn't the most melodically interesting thing that I would do. And luckily, I have horns at that point. So all I'd done with the horn so far was that little give it one, ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-dum. It's not even give it one, it's just a little lick. In jazz language, this is an enclosure for people who are paying attention. Ba-da-doo-dum. F is really the note that I'm targeting here, and I'm preceding it by G, G flat, E, F. It's preceding that F with a note or two that are a step above it and a note below it. In jazz terms, we call that an enclosure. In classical terms, you'd call it a double, or in this case, a triple appoggiatura. There are 3 notes that each one of them, G to F, G, F could have been called an appoggiatura, or G flat F, or E, F. Any one of those notes would have made a fine appoggiatura, a note that's not in the chord, that is not approached by step. It's just a note that's there. Any one of those notes on their own would have been a nice appoggiatura into the F. By combining them like that, you get what's called an enclosure. So anyhow, that's just a jazz-ism there. So I hadn't really used the horns for anything other than that little ba-da-ba-da-ba-doo-da. And then I did another version of that. Again, that same enclosure, this time to approach the E flat chord. Oh, by the way, my Maynard reference, also Maynard Ferguson, is at the end of this chord. That last chord there is a B flat 7. Here's the 7th. A flat, there's the 3rd, D. The note on top, when I originally wrote this line, was just going to be a B flat, ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-bum. It was going to be a B flat on top. But then I was like, I decided to push up the Maynardness of this, because if we go back to where that Maynard, do I still have it? I guess I closed that window. Well, whatever. That's a sharp 9 chord, a dominant 7th chord with a sharp 9. That's what this D flat is. It's the flatted 3rd, or sharp 9 is another way of looking at it. So that chord is a very Maynardy chord, as funk chord in general, but it's super associated with that kind of music from Maynard Ferguson. So yeah, once I realized, oh, I don't have the brass doing, I don't have my horns doing anything for these 2 bars. Then I was like, well, now I got my answer. It's I'm gonna let them take this melody. Now here, I was okay with the trumpet going up because I wasn't trying to stay in the same range on the piano. I wanted it to go up. I wanted it to hit a climactic note at the end. And so I have the line go up. So this part here is exactly the same as the top of my piano. But at this point, the piano voicing starts coming down. E flat, D flat, C, B flat. Whereas the trumpet, starting on that E, goes E, F, G flat, A flat, B flat. It's all the roots of the chords. E is the root. There's an E7 voice there. F over an F7 chord. G flat over a G flat 7. A flat over the A flat 7, B flat over the B flat 7. So here is where, again, you need to think about rules and what they really tell you. There are rules of music that say, no, I will put it the way it's mistakenly put. Avoid parallel octaves, or, that's one of the things they tell you. But what it really means, avoid doing that if you don't want that sound. But I do want that sound here. I wanted that exact sound that I'm going to get with the by having it align here. This is the only place actually where all the parts align, right? I talked about how I went out of my way not to align everything too much rhythmically. But when I hit this spot, everything does align, at least if I mute the guitar and the saxophone and the trombone here. If I mute them, you'll hear everyone's kind of together. Oops, I missed tenor sax. I thought I deleted my tenor sax. Oh, I must be reading the wrong version of this. I tried to delete the tenor sax part at one point, but there isn't one. Right? That's the one spot where the counterpoint basically ends and everyone's together. So at that spot, having the trumpet melody being doubling the bass part there, an octave above, or 2 octaves, 3 octaves above, whatever it is fine. I didn't want to completely lose that contrapuntal texture, so I let the horns tell that story. The horns had never done any counterpoint yet. They had always been kind of moving in lockstep. The only thing I did was I didn't make the trombone do that little enclosure, because that's a little too much. Trombones can play a lot of notes, but I wanted to have the trombone part be a little bit simpler, so I thinned out the texture by not having the trombone have that first initial enclosure. So I see this question here. I'll come to that in a second. So I decided that this is what I call a cascade figure. B D D. So the D sharp, and then B flat, and then E. That's the same voicing that the piano has, or almost the same voicing. It's an A instead of an E. Um, so and my voicing when I originally played it on the piano actually did have the B flat there. But then I realized, oh, but I'm doubling the B flat then. I've got the B flat in the left hand. So I changed my piano voicing to be an A, to have a 13th in there. So I don't have any doubled notes in here because I wanted that extra crunch. I wanted the extra crunch. So, but I realized I could get this really interesting cascading effect by giving both the B flat and the A to the alto, and then having the E come in later. So you get this, so that the sound, the effect is basically this. So that there's moving things that are happening there. I start with the melody note, and then the rest of the chord fills in after that. And originally, I just had this as a quarter note, so like this. But then I realized, hey, I could actually have my B flat that I really wanted and the A, and let the alto have even more motion. And that's what I ended up with. So that's what I did for that. All right, so the question that I'm seeing here is, yeah, so that B flat 7 sharp 9 is such a typical funk kind of thing. And actually, I almost used it here. I was going to have voiced that with a D flat on top and then the A flat and then the D below it. But in my head, I heard a different sound. And this is worth pointing out also, even though I closed the window, I'm going to get it back. Again, I referenced my memory. That's like probably a 20-year-old memory since I actually heard the piece. But so Lee Morgan wrote this piece called The Sidewinder that was a big hit for a jazz piece back in like the 60s. And for a while, every single album that Lee Morgan put out or that Blue Note Records put out had to have a piece on it that kind of sounded like the Sidewinder, hoping to have another hit. Well, this was one of the ones that was never a hit because they didn't even bother releasing it until posthumously, and they never even gave it a name. But check this out. That blah sound. I really liked that sound. So I didn't go back and listen to the recording. I just had this memory. Oh yeah, I remember that one Lee Morgan Untitled Boogaloo that I heard 20 years ago. I heard it a lot 20 years ago because I used to listen to that album a lot, and I never transcribed it or anything, but I heard that sound in my head. And when I voiced this chord originally with the sharp 9 on top, it didn't give me that sound. It had that other sound. And I'm like, no, I want that boogaloo sound. What is that? And it took some trial and error to find it. And this is what I came up with. And what it is, it's the B flat and then A flat, which is the 7th, and then G, which is the 6th or 13th, all in a big cluster. I think the Lee Morgan version, this instead of alto is on tenor and it's an octave lower. So it's more like this. So it's a little deeper of a sound. But in any case, I wasn't trying to copy it. I was just going for that basic sound. So I see that also the question here about why the last chord of the second measure is C flat instead of B. So yeah, I could have notated it. Or why isn't it? All right. After the first double. Okay, so you're talking about this chord here. Okay, technically it is C flat. Technically it's C flat. I have to make some judgment calls sometimes about when, and the reason it's technically C flat is it's resolving down. The general rule of thumb is you resolve things. If it's going down, you spell with flats. If you're going resolving up, you spell with sharps. That is the general rule. And if this were transposed into any other key, I would have spelt that thing that way. But I don't know. I just made my own judgment call that at some level, I just don't like seeing C flat 7 chords spelled out that much. Here's what it would look like. It's okay. I can read that. I'm okay with it. Um, I'm totally okay with, oops, no, the problem is that is not an A, it's a B double flat. There you go. This is what it would look like that way. And yeah, C flat, B double flat, E flat, A flat, C flat. It's just a lot of flats to read. And you have to make a judgment call at some point. When do you want to stick to your guns and say, by God, that really is a C flat, versus when do you want to say, you know what, it's going to be a little more readable if I call it B. And say, sometimes I stick to my guns and sometimes I cave, and I caved on this one is basically my answer there. So that is basically the piece. This voicing here, as I said, very crunchy. It's got that sharp 9 on top, but then it also has this 13th in it that makes it that sort of extra crunch, because that 13th has a 7th against the 7th of the chord, and so it gives you that extra level of crunch. And then I'm basically moving these voicings around in parallel, and that's what's happening. So that is essentially the piece. Yeah, esoteric, I don't know. Yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, if it was just that one note, yeah, but if I had to put a chord symbol on it, I don't like to have to read C flat 7 as a chord symbol. And as soon as I wrote out a voicing that had a B double flat in it, then I felt I was just pushing it. It's fine. I do want to call attention, though, while I'm at it, to this little thing that I wrote that I think kind of sounds vaguely idiomatic, even though it's not notated right or anything, but this little sound here. I think that should really be a 10th, that really this little figure that I hear as being a fretless bass thing, I think is usually done as a 10th and not a third. But it worked for me this way. It feels like a line that I hear bassists do on both acoustic bass and fretless, fretless electric. Anyhow, yeah, so that's my exploration of this piece. And yeah, I got to touch on some of these counterpoint issues that we now get to talk about that much more as I go into these fugues. And yes, I entered it from the computer keyboard. Yeah, I mean, I never click anything in. I don't hook up MIDI. I have a MIDI keyboard. I'm capable of hooking it up, but it's just more trouble than it's worth. It's way easier for me to type the notes in. I type fast. And I can type accurately, and I can spell notes the way I want to spell them rather than having MIDI guess whether I want to call it B or C flat. So anyhow, that is the piece. So you'll be hearing it if you tune into the cafe. You'll hear it every week, and now you'll know a little bit more about what went into it. Oh, one other thing I should point out. I said this is the last 4-bar phrase, but check it out. And that's it. I chopped off the last bar, which is a typical theme. You hear this all the time in like TV or radio spots where they're dealing with a certain amount of time. You'll hear them like take a pop song and then steal 2 beats out of one of the measures, because by gosh, they want to get that whole chorus into their 15-second spot. And you'll hear them like take 2 beats out of a thing, or take 1 measure out, or take a beat out of this, and just to shorten the thing. And it'll sound almost like the original version of the pop song, but they will have stolen a few beats out. Well, here I stole 1 measure out of my blues. And then it's just from there on out through to talk over, and then a coda, which is basically copy and pasted from the last 4 bars of the piece. Okay, so now for something completely different. Oh, I do want to see what the heck. I thought I deleted that tenor saxophone and I didn't. So it's possible that this isn't my correct version of this score, but I think it is. It's the one that's got the parts on it, because I did actually generate the parts. So, all right, good enough. So I saw 3 people actually submit some fugues here. And so William followed up on his, but I also see one here from Sam, and I see this one from Dean that I got to start with, because he color coded it, which is so cool. So by color coding it, then I can see what's going on. I want to get this palette to be my normal size because I think I usually size it according to the lines. So I can fit 3 lines across now. See, I never even remember now, so I shouldn't obsess about it, but I do. So you get to see a little bit of my thought process. Yeah, I want to see 3 lines. So there you go. And that got messed up when I accidentally docked the mixer over there. Okay, so but I don't actually need the palette at this point, so I'm just going to close the thing. Bye bye. So he's actually color coded his fugue here. So we're going to play it and hear what's going on. But the color coding is so that we can see each entrance, right? Red here is the initial statement. Green here is the answer. And then purple here is this counter subject that we're hearing against that theme. And so, yeah, I want to hear what's happening here. Beautiful, Dean. In his comments to this piece, I have to point out the comments there. So go to the music master class. So oh yeah, commercial announcement time. This is music master class. This is where you can post your scores if you've been writing stuff that you want us to be taking a look at. You want me to be taking a look at, because I just post. I just look at what people have posted and pick stuff to talk about. So I don't have any better process in mind than whatever strikes my fancy. If there's ever so many pieces that I don't know what to do with, I'll come up with a better process. But for now, this is what I'm doing. And in any case, you want to go to my actual site also. So that's the group on MuseScore.com where you can upload scores to. But you also, if you're not already, school.masteringmusescore.com, my site where you can actually get notification about this music masterclass, and I'll send you the links, and you can check out the other courses I offer and the other resources. So that's my commercial. All right, I don't do the hard sell. So yeah, anyhow, back on the thing here, if you click on sheet music, you'll then see these fugues. And when we click on Dean's fugue, you'll see that he has explained his color coding and also mentions the tempo changes are for dramatic, or more accurately, comedic effect. So yeah, that's I would say an accurate statement. Yeah. So well, let's just look while we're here. It says the red notes are the subject. Great. Purple is the counter subject. So red is the original subject. That's Clementine, right? Purple is the counter subject, meaning the notes that the original voice plays while the second voice is playing the subject. So here's the subject now. What's in green, because this is the transposed version. It's not in the original key. It's not F, 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 C. It's alto clef, C, 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 G, E, 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 C. And I'm doing my darndest to read this in alto clef. But I will tell you right now, I'm not reading it because I read alto clef. I'm transposing. I'm looking at the interval relationships. I know that that is a C because it's the little gap there in the clef. So that's that is a C. So C, 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 and then I see it's down a fourth, C, G, E. So I don't know that that's a G. I just see that it's down a fourth because I recognize in treble clef or in bass clef, that's what down a fourth looks like. And then I recognize that this looks like a triad. Ding, ding, ding. Now, I could have known that because the original is outlining a triad. But remember, this idea that we might do what are called tonal adjustments to this is very common. So the tonal adjustments, like here, he opens with that C and he comes down to a G. Realistically, had Bach written this, he probably wouldn't have made that a G. He probably would have made that be an F. He probably would have had the answer instead of going, so the original subject was 1, 1, 1, 5. Then he would have had the response be 5, 5, 5, 1. He would have changed the interval. So instead of going down a fourth, it goes down a fifth. Probably he would have, not necessarily. But that's what a tonal adjustment is. By doing this, by having this be C to G here, we are now definitely telling a story of a C chord. And what you'll see in a lot of these fugues is that people don't do that. They want to stay feeling grounded on that F chord. So they would change that note from a G to an F so that this jump feels like you're still on an F chord. It is by no means required, but that is one of the choices you make. So he is now outlining, and then similarly, he might have gone C, 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 F, and then figured out what note he would want here to be something else that's not too C majory. Or maybe he would say, you know what, I'm going to have that note anyhow. These are all judgment calls, but I'm just pointing out what goes on. But he is very clearly outlining a C chord here. So his counter subject, B, D, 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 B flat, bum, 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 bum. So here, if it were me, I might have said, well, as long as I've gone to C, I might have made that be a B natural to say, let's be in C now. So he's still got B flats here. I'm going to change them all to Bs just so you hear what it sounds like. I'm not saying you need to do this, but this would make it feel like key of C now. And then I let it be B flat here because I'm trying to set up this G minor and then D and then G minor, D business here, and the B flat helps with that. So you get to make those choices when you're doing that. So I'm not, saying Dean made the wrong choice. I'm just pointing out that that was another choice that could have been made there. So he made up this little extra melody. So that's his counter subject. So the counter subject, one of the things you want, one of the important things about your main subject is it needs to be recognizable. It needs to be easily recognizable so that anytime it enters in the fugue, even if it's disguised a little bit because some of the intervals have been changed, that it would still be recognizable. So the original melody here has that. This counter subject isn't as recognizable, but it doesn't necessarily need to be because it's the counter subject. What you need it to have is little fragments that are recognizable so that even if you miss the D, 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 if you don't hear every entrance of that figure, because here he's using it, boo, bum, ba, da, dum. So here he has made a tonal adjustment, right? The original counter subject, D, 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 within that C chord, that's 3, 5, 3, 2, 1. But now he's bringing it in here over this F chord. 5, 1, 5, 4, 3. So it's a leap up of a fourth instead of a leap up of a third. So he's made a tonal adjustment in his counter subject, which is great. But it does mean that maybe I wouldn't have recognized it. But I think do 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 da da dum. I think I would have recognized it here, right? By those 16th notes. And that's what you want. You want little fragments of that counter subject to be recognizable so that when it comes in, someone says, hey, he's using that counter subject again. Because realistically, a fugue is only going to have two bits of ideas to it. It's got its main subject and it's got its counter subject, and everything else is going to be spun from one of those things with some, as he has here, the notes that are colored black aren't necessarily related to anything. He says these are free voices using the circle of fifths to modulate. Well, yes, it is modulating here, G, and then back to D, and then coming to G again, then C, and then F. So G, C, F. That's our circle of fifths. So let's hear that little passage. And now he's back to the key of F. So he's used the circle of fifths, G minor, that he kind of elaborates for a while, and then C, and then F. So this is the section here that could be called a bridge, is what it would be called in, is one of the terms that's used anyhow in fugue land. He's got this bridge here, some extra material to get him out of whatever key area he was in when he finished his finished his that's the last note of the actual Clementine. And then he threw in these three extra notes there that he then kind of echoes up here. But that's the end of the subject. Everything else here is now trying to get him back to the original key. Now, one thing that I noticed, are any fugues more complicated with three? So there's what's called a double fugue, where you actually have two complete subjects that then get developed together. And then each one of those would have its own counter subject. And so, yeah, that's then called a double fugue when you do that. It's certainly possible that, like, when the third voice comes in here, so the third voice has come in here, the top voice has the counter subject again. He could have given the counter subject to the middle voice. That would be a little more typical. But in any case, the top voice or someone is going to have something else. So he's just given it some more notes that he's got in black here. But this little figure here, do da dum, ba da da dum, boo da dum. Oh my gosh, that kind of resembles Clementine in some way. It dee 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 dee. It feels like, by that dotted 8/16 rhythm, it feels related. And he could have chosen to make any of that a figure to reuse. So any of this figure here that the third voice ends up adding could be reused. But typically, you got your hands full just dealing with the material you have, because realistically, the textures get thick enough that your task is to make sure you recognize, you write the your entrances in such a way that every time it enters, someone recognizes, hey, there's that subject again, or hey, there's that counter subject again, or there's that figure from the counter subject that I recognize. The more of those you put in, the less chances are that you're going to be able to, like, keep the listener focused on what it is that he's supposed to be recognizing. I'm not saying the listener's incapable of doing it, but the just having a subject and really treating it well, and making sure that it really is when you bring it in, that you're able to bring it in as completely as possible, as accurately as possible, with as few of these little adjustments as necessary. Just doing that and then reusing this material that you already have, that's more than enough to keep you busy usually. So he's got a whole lot of stuff here, starting here, that now, by his color coding, tells me it's not directly anything, but it is. So I'm telling you, this do-da-da-da-dum is this little figure. Do-da-da-da-dum. This figure, do-da-da-do-dum. This figure is somehow that figure. It's 4/16 notes that goes up and then comes down. It's not exactly the same, but it's related. It's reminiscent of. And so this is the sort of thing that you typically do. And then it's a sequence, right? Now this is, so this, ba-da-da-bum-bum-bum, and then so that is a sequence, taking that exact same passage and moving it around, and yes, following the circle of fifths. Um, so that's the typical way a sequence would be developed is around the circle of fifths like that. Now, one thing I would point out, yeah, the viola part is the second half of Clementine altered. Yeah, so I was right. Yeah, do da 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 da. Oh, ba da 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 dum. That's what's happening here. Do do da 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 dum. One of the things that Dean does in his melody here, do 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 ba da 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 ba da da dum. The last note of the melody that he started with is scale degree 2. If you look at that, I posted a link last time or showed you where BSG put this really great treatise on how to write a good subject. And one of the things that he talks about is choosing your notes carefully as far as what note you start your line with and what note you end the line with. And that there's certain notes that by virtue of where you've ended the line, you can cause yourself some trouble. And like so this note here, scale degree 2, once it transposes here, it is now scale degree 6. Well, scale degree 6 doesn't fit uh, the 1 chord or the 5 chord, so it's most likely we've taken ourselves into different territory. Now, by adding 3 extra notes here so that it gets to end on scale degree 4, it does mean the final line, well, that scale degree 4 should have been 7, but he made this tonal adjustment here. Oh no, that see, I have to read this clap. That's a G. So he's actually, it would have been, had you followed that literally, that would have been scale degree 1. That would have been an F here. And then you could have felt like you were actually on maybe a 4 chord and come directly back to 1. You would have had a shorter journey. So by what notes you end your subject with, then when it's transposed, this tells you where your response, where your answer is going to end. And that tells you how much work you have to do to get back to the original key. So by the where you chose to end your original subject and how you chose to adjust it here, you created that extra work of having to get from G minor back to F. And that's why it took as long as it did to get there, which is fine. You can totally do that. Um, but anyhow, that's the point I'm making about that. Um, so here you've got the sequence and it's moving through the keys. This little bit here definitely has a jazzy feel to it, I have to point out. So this chromatic passing tone into the C chord, there's definitely a little bit of jazziness to me in that, because what I hear is basically a G major chord, right? The B natural gives me a G major at that point. We're still hearing the G in our heads. So I hear the B natural, which is the third, the D is the fifth, and uh, this then is like a sharp 5. So it's creating like a little augmented chord leading into this 1 chord here with that chromatic passing tone. And it's chromatic passing tones are fine in any genre, but it definitely takes that in that direction. So here, approaching that F chord, the B natural as a chromatic note into that is fine, but I would have loved to have heard a B flat going into an A happening here. Just speaking for myself, just because if I really want to make that circle of fifths happen, I'm really going to love sevenths where I can make them happen. Oh, yeah. So for that matter, if I had not wanted the chromatic passing tone here, I might have gone up to an F. By doing that, that F is then the seventh of the G7 coming into the third. That would have felt a little more Bach-y, for what it's worth. And so similarly, if this had been a B flat, which then really would resolve to an A, and then maybe this guy would want to be a different note. I'll make that one be a C. Right, so this, I'm not saying there was anything wrong. And again, all I do is I like showing alternatives so you see what choices exist. This B going into the C, this fooled my ear into thinking that you were staying on the C chord. I didn't comprehend that it was an F chord, even though the F was there in the bass. So I hear it now that I'm ready for it, but that B natural into C creates this leading tone effect, and so it fooled me. Here, it didn't fool me at all. This chromatic motion into the third, that didn't fool me. The chromatic motion into the fifth fooled me a bit, and also the fact that there's this big leap from the C up to the A. I think I didn't hear the A as strongly as I would because it wasn't led to. Had this been C and then up in that octave, and then the B flat. And then maybe here, I'm just going to step down. So now I get to have B flat into A, and my C is now approached without that little chromatic tone. Let me hear this now. That also feels Bach-y to me. I see William also has a question about do double fugues have their subjects alternate? You do what you want. No, but they do happen at the same time, but typically the exposition, the beginning might just do one at a time. But the rules for fugues, it's not about rules, it's about goals. The goal is to have this piece in which you get a lot of mileage out of one subject and maybe a counter subject to it. And then if you really want to push your luck, you get a lot of mileage out of two subjects. But you do what you want within that. There's certain conventions that are typically followed. If you want an example, the G minor, in fact, why not? I'm just going to bring it up. Bach, G minor. Is it the G minor? No, G major fugue. I got to think about this a second. It's the G major fugue from the Well-Tempered Clavier. So if I go to where I've got all those, well, it'll take me a while to find it. Anyhow, go look it up. The G major Bach fugue is a double fugue, if I remember right. And if it's not that one, it's G minor, but I think it's G major. In any case, let's get back to what I had here. Now here he's setting up a minor key thing. So one of the observations that I will make is typically in a Baroque or early classical at least thing, we typically wouldn't move as far as the key of B flat minor. If you think about the circle of fifths, F major has one flat. The key of B flat minor has 5 flats. That's a long ways on the circle of fifths. It's a long ways to get there. And very recently we were still in the key of basically one flat. There's still no additional flats, Still, we got a C chord for gosh sakes here with a B natural even. There's still no additional flats. All of a sudden, we're in this land of 5 flats. But one of the things that makes that work is it's really, although it's going from 1 flat to 5 flats, in one sense, it's only 2 steps removed in that F major to B flat major would have been only 1 step on the circle of fifths, or 1 tick, I'll say. So from F, because if I say step, you think I mean F to G. I'm talking about the circle of fifths, like think of it as a clock, 1 tick of the clock. So from F, which has 1 flat, to B flat, which has 2 flats. Or can you see that? F to B flat. I'm being a hand on a clock. From F to B flat, if it was F to B flat major, that would be 1 tick away. But then from B flat major to B flat minor, that's holding the same root. So that's the other thing that's kind of allowed in modulation to still feel like it's a related key, is going from parallel major to parallel minor, from F major to F minor. So here he's kind of cut out the middleman. If he had gone to B flat major, then B flat minor, it would have felt more expected. By cutting out the middleman, it really became unexpected and becomes a very dramatic thing. So I don't know that Bach would have done this, but Beethoven, by the end of his career, would have. Sure. And really nice job of coming back, by having that B flat minor, then move up to this B diminished to set up the C chord. That's really nice harmonic motion. And I would say that's kind of a long episode. I think that's the term that is used for a passage. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, almost 8 measures in which we don't hear the subject. That's kind of long. So if it were me, because really at this point, we've only just finished the exposition. We've gotten, this is the end of, this is right, the third entrant. At that point, I'm ready. We're done with the exposition, and maybe you have a bar to wrap things up and bring you back to F. But at that point, normally we would expect another what are called the middle entries, and this is where we start bringing in things. And episodes happen. Episodes are again these passages where you're just developing little fragments rather than having complete statements. But typically, after this, I would expect there to be at least a partial statement. So I might look at how I could adjust things, like if like keeping to the harmonic structure, could I adjust what's happening here and go F F F D F F F D, then A, and then cheat because that A is going to be a non-harmonic tone here. But anyhow, listen to what this sounds like. This isn't, these Fs aren't going to fit harmonically what's going on there, but they might. All right, so just dee 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 might be enough, but dee, whoops, dee dee dee. I'm singing the word D, not the note D. So by introducing just that little bit of something that feels related to the subject, it would allow me to not have to say, oh, I went 8 bars without hearing the subject. Because again, typically you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go that long without hearing the subject. Certainly not right at the beginning of the middle entries. But there's no law against it. No law against it at all. So yeah, I like how the dramatic change happens here. I like the modulation back, and then minor version. Yeah, really nice. Now at this point, the cello has kind of dropped out of being counterpoint, right? He's just being a bass voice, being a pedal point, which is actually quite typical in the end of a fugue, is that you would have this pedal point, which is really what this is doing. It's just like the organ sitting, like putting his foot down on a pedal and just hanging it, letting. That's a typical ending sort of thing there. So in any case, I thought Dean, you did a fantastic job here, and I love that you color coded things. I'm going to look at the other two fugues next time, I think, because yeah, we're on a little bit of a fugue kick. At least I am, and so I definitely want to look at these other fugues. But I've I also don't want to go on forever and ever. So we're going to look at the other fugues next week, and that'll be my plan. So I hope people enjoyed the session today. Enjoyed hearing a little bit of what I did to create that cafe theme music. Maybe my next week I'll have some theme music for this. Maybe it'll be, yeah, I expect it would be contrapuntal. I'm gonna bring in something, if not an actual fugue, at least something that has some of that vibe to it. Is kind of where I imagine going, and then we'll see what I actually come up with. So I hope everyone again had a good time here, learned something, and by all means, write music. Doesn't have to be fugues, doesn't have to be anything. Take any ideas you hear me talk about, explore them on your own, or just submit whatever you're working on your own. But I love it if you like take some of the ideas that I'm talking about and say, hey, how can I try to apply that? So if it means you try to write a fugue, great. Or if it means you try to write something that has some aspects of what the cafe theme had to it, have a ball with that. Would love to get to talk about some of those things as well. So I look forward to talking to y'all next week. So thanks again. Visit my site, check things out, get on my mailing list if you're not already, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye everyone.